Kealakekua Bay is located on the Kona coast of the island of Hawaiʻi, about 12 miles south of Kailua-Kona, settled over 1,000 years ago. The surrounding area contains many archeological and historical sites such as religious temples, and also includes the spot where the first documented European to reach the Hawaiian Islands, Captain James Cook, died. It was listed in the National Register of Historic Places listings on the island of Hawaii in 1973 as the Kealakekua Bay Historical District. The bay is a marine life conservation district, a popular destination for kayaking, scuba diving, and snorkeling. Ancient history. Settlement on Kealakekua Bay has a long history. Hawaiʻi was a Luakini temple of ancient Hawaii at the south end of the bay, at coordinates 19.4752 degrees north, 155.91917 degrees west, 19.47528 minus 155.91917, associated with funeral rites. The large platform of volcanic rock was originally over 16 feet high, 250 feet long, and 100 feet wide. The sheer cliff face called Kealakekua overlooking the bay was the burial place of Hawaiian royalty. The name means Forbidden Cliffs of Keaua in honor of Keaunui. He was sometimes known as the Father of Kings, since many rulers were his descendants. The difficulty in accessing the cliff kept the exact burial places secret. The village of Kawaloa was at the north end of the bay in ancient times, where the Puhina Olonohai was built, along with some royal residences. The name of the village means the distant carver, from the medicinal plant used in religious rituals. The name of the bay comes from Kealakekua in the Hawaiian language, which means the god's pathway. Quote, "This area was the focus of extensive makahiki celebrations in honor of the god Lono." Another name for the area north of the bay was Hailki, due to the large number of wood carvings, better known today as tiki. Captain Cook and Kalani. Although there are theories that Spanish or Dutch sailors might have stopped here much earlier, the first documented European to arrive was Captain James Cook. He and his crews on the Resolution and Discovery sighted Kealakekua Bay on the morning of January 17, 1779. He estimated several thousand people lived in the two villages. On January 28, he performed the first Christian service on the islands, for the funeral of a crew member who had died. Cook had entered the bay during makahiki. This was a traditionally peaceful time of year, so he and his men were welcomed and given food. Cook and his crew stayed for several weeks, returning to sea shortly after the end of the festival. After suffering damage during a storm, the ships returned 2 weeks later, on February 14. This time relations were not as smooth. After the theft of one of Resolution's small boats by a local native Hawaiian, Cook attempted to lure Hawaiian chief Kalani aboard to hold as hostage until the boat was returned. A skirmish ensued, during which Cook was killed near the spot where he had first set foot on the island. Cook's death was depicted in a series of paintings. Death of Cook. The monument is accessed by a 1-hour hike from the road or by crossing the bay by boat. Turmoil. When Kalani died in 1782, his oldest son Kuala'o officially inherited the kingdom, but his nephew Kamehameha I became guardian of the god Kukailimoku. A younger son, Keauakuahu'ula, was not happy about this and provoked Kamehameha. The forces met just south of the bay at the Battle of Moku'oi. Kamehameha won control of the west and north sides of the island, but Keaua escaped. It would take over a decade to consolidate his control. In 1786, merchant ships of the King George's Sound Company under command of the maritime fur traders Nathaniel Portlock and Captain George Dixon anchored in the harbor, but avoided coming ashore. They had been on Cook's voyage when he was killed by natives. In December 1788, the Iphigenia under William Douglas arrived with Chief Kayaking, who had already traveled to China. The first American ship was probably the Lady Washington around this time under Captain John Kendrick. Two sailors, Parson Howell and James Boyd, left the ship and lived on the island. In March 1790, the American ship Eleanora arrived at Kealakekua Bay and sent a British sailor ashore named John Young to determine whether the sister ship, the schooner Fair American, had arrived for its planned rendezvous. Young was detained by Kamehameha's men to prevent the Eleanora's captain Simon Metcalfe from hearing the news of the destruction of the Fair American, and the death of Metcalfe's son, after the massacre at Olawalu. Young and Isaac Davis, the lone survivor of the Fair American, slowly adjusted to the island lifestyle. They instructed Hawaiians in the use of the captured cannon and muskets, becoming respected advisors to Kamehameha. In 1791, Spanish explorer Manuel Quimper visited on the ship Princess Royal. More visitors. George Vancouver arrived in March 1792 to winter in the islands with a small fleet of British ships. He had been a young midshipman on Cook's fatal voyage 13 years earlier and commanded the party that attempted to recover Cook's remains. He avoided anchoring in Kealakekua Bay, but met some men in canoes who were interested in trading. The common request was for firearms, which Vancouver resisted. One included Chief Kayaking, who would later turn against Kamehameha. Vancouver suspected Kayaking intended to seize his ships, so left him behind and headed up the coast. But he was surprised to encounter a Hawaiian who in broken English introduced himself as Jack, and told of traveling to America on a fur trading ship. Through him, Vancouver met Keeaumoku Papaiahiahi, who gave him a favorable impression of Kamehameha. He spent the rest of the winter in Oahu. Vancouver returned in February 1793. This time he picked up Keeaumoku and anchored in Kealakekua Bay. When Kamehameha came to greet the ship, he brought John Young, now fluent in the Hawaiian language, as an interpreter. This greatly helped to develop a trusted trading relationship. The Hawaiians presented a war game, which was often part of the Makahiki celebration. Impressed by the warriors' abilities, Vancouver fired off some fireworks at night to demonstrate his military technology. Vancouver presented some cattle which he had picked up in California. They were weak and barely alive, so he convinced Kamehameha to avoid killing them for 10 years. Scottish Dr. James Lind had recommended the use of citrus juice to prevent scurvy on long voyages. The botanist Archibald Menzies had picked up some citrus fruit seeds in South Africa and dropped them off here, so that future ships might be able to replenish the stocks at the Hawaiian Islands. Vancouver left in March 1793 after visiting the other islands to continue his expedition, and returned again January 13, 1794. He still hoped to broker a truce between Kamehameha and the other islands. His first step was to reconcile Kamehameha with Queen Kahumanu. He dropped off more cattle and sheep from California and discovered a cow left the year before had delivered a calf. The cattle became feral and eventually became pests. They were not controlled until the Hawaiian cowboys, known as the Panialo, were recruited. The ship's carpenters instructed the Hawaiians and the British advisors how to build a 36-foot European-style ship, which they named the Britannia. On February 25, 1794, Vancouver gathered leaders from around the island onto his ship and negotiated a treaty. Although this treaty was sometimes described as ceding Hawaii to Great Britain, the treaty was never ratified by British Parliament. Decline. For the next few years, Kamehameha was engaged in his war campaigns, and then spent his last years at Kamekahonu to the north. By this time other harbors such as Lahaina and Honolulu became popular with visiting ships. By 1804, the High was falling into disuse. In 1814, a British ship HMS Forester arrived in the midst of a mutiny. Otto von Kotzebue arrived in 1816 on a mission from the Russian Empire. When Kamehameha I died in 1819, his oldest son Liholiho officially inherited the kingdom, calling himself Kamehameha II. His nephew Kealakekua inherited the important military and religious post of guardian of Kukailimoku. However, true power was held by Kamehameha's widow, Queen Kahumanu. She had been convinced by Vancouver and other visitors that the European customs should be adopted. In the Ainoa she declared an end to the old kapu system. Kekuaokalani was outraged by this threat to the old traditions, which still were respected by most common people. He gathered religious supporters at Kawiloa, threatening to take the kingdom by force, as happened 37 years earlier. After a failed attempt to negotiate peace, he marched his army north to meet Kalanimoku's troops who were gathered at Kamekahonu. They met in the Battle of Kuamo. Both sides had muskets, but Kalanimoku had cannon mounted on double-hulled canoes. He devastated the fighters for the old religion, who still lie buried in the lava rock. The woodkey carvings were burned, and the temples fell into disrepair. A small Christian church was built in 1824 in Kawiloa by the Hawaiian missionaries, and the narrow trail widened to a donkey cart road in the late 1820s. But the population declined and shifted to other areas. In 1825, Admiral Lord Byron on the ship HMS Blonde erected a monument to Cook and took away many of the old, sacred artifacts. The last royalty known to live here was High Chief Na, known as the National Orator, and his wife Chiefess Kapiolani, early converts to Christianity. In 1829, she was saddened to see that the destruction of the temples included desecrating the bones of her ancestors at the Pu'aunu'oro Hononau. She removed the remains of the old chiefs and hid them in the Pali Kapuokio'ua cliffs before ordering this last temple to be destroyed. The bones were later moved to the Royal Mausoleum of Hawaii in 1858, under direction of King Kamehameha IV. In 1839 a massive stone church was built just south of the bay. It fell into ruin, and a smaller building called Kahikolu Church was built in 1852. This also fell into ruin, but has been rebuilt. In 1894 a wharf was constructed at the village at the south of the bay, now called Napupu. A steamer landed in the early 20th century when Kona coffee became a popular crop in the upland areas. A large white stone monument was built on the north shore of the bay in 1874 on the order of Princess Likelike and was deeded to the United Kingdom. In 1877, the chain around the monument is supported by 4 cannon from the ship HMS Phantom. They were placed with the breeches embedded in the rock in 1876. It marks the approximate location of Cook's death. It is located at coordinates 19.481306 degrees north, 155.93344 degrees west, 19.481306 minus 155.9334444. The Cook Monument is unreachable by road. This remote location is accessible only by water or an hour-long hike along a moderately steep trail. Many visitors have rented kayaks and paddled across the bay, about 1.5 miles from its southern end. State conservation regulations prohibit kayaks, stand-up paddleboards, surfboards, and bodyboards from entering the bay unless part of a tour with a licensed local operator. The pier at Napapu can be accessed down a narrow road off the Hawaii Belt Road. The beach sand was mostly removed by Hurricane Iniki in 1992. Boat tours are also available, leaving from Monacoa Harbor, Kealakekua Bay, and the Kailua Pier. Hawaiian spinner dolphins frequent Kealakekua Bay, especially in the morning. The bay serves as a place for them to rest and feed, and as a nursery for mothers and their calves. Due to the calm water conditions, extensive coral reef, and thriving underwater life, Kealakekua Bay offers some of the best snorkeling and diving in Hawaii, especially in the shallow waters adjacent to the monument. About 180 acres around the bay was designated a state historic park in 1967, and it was added as a historic district to the National Register of Historic Places in 1973 as Site 73,651. The 315 acres of the bay itself were declared a marine life conservation district in 1969. A narrow one-lane road to the south leads to Puʻuʻuʻuhononau National Historical Park, which contains more historic sites. In popular culture, in Arthur C. Clarke's book Rendezvous with Rama, Kealakekua Bay is mentioned as a place where Bill Norton, the commander of the space survey vessel Endeavour, visited. The 1933 song, My Little Grass Shack in Kealakekua, Hawaii, mentions the state fish which can be found in the bay, the Humuhumunukunikua Parei.